Welcome to the Narcissist Slayers podcast with your hosts, Hope Jay
and Lynn Catalano.
Every episode, we focus on recovery from narcissistic abuse. We talk about topics that we believe will help people to identify signs of abuse, learn strategies to cope, and most importantly, how to heal and move forward from narcissistic abuse. We are both survivors of narcissistic abuse ourselves, lawyers, and one of us is an author.
Well, thank you, Hope. My book, Wrecking Ball Relationships, How to Identify, Live With, or Leave the Narcissist in Your Life, is available in many places, including my website, lynncatalano.com.
Because we have been in your shoes, we know how difficult this journey can be. That is why I founded the Center for Hope of Western New York, a nonprofit organization which provides education, support, and advocacy for survivors of narcissistic abuse. You can find out more about the Center for Hope at centerforhopewny.org, and all donations are gratefully welcomed and tax exempt.
Please follow us on X and Instagram at NarcSlayersPod, and also on Facebook, TikTok, LinkedIn, Spotify, and YouTube, the Narcissist Slayers Podcast. You can also email us directly with your questions at narcslayers@centerforhopewny.org.
Welcome back to the Narcissist Slayers Podcast with your hosts, Hope Jay
and Lynn Catalano.
And we want to remind you that we have recently rebranded our social media. And if you enjoy our content, please go to YouTube and subscribe to our channel, the Narcissist Slayers Podcast. You can also follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok, and Spotify at the Narcissist Slayers Podcast.
And don't forget about X and Instagram at NarcSlayersPod.
So today, we are going to be talking about why couples counseling doesn't work when you are in a relationship or trying to save a relationship with your narcissistic partner. Yeah. And I think that many of us find ourselves in that place. It's usually after a discard, after something significant happens. We find out that our partner has been having an affair, they've been cheating, or something else happens where we are at our lowest point in the relationship. And the cycle starts again. They come back, they beg, they plead, they try to apologize and convince us that we should stay in the relationship. And I think that we can still oftentimes be convinced to stay when they agree, to go to counseling. And it's something that, this is not in any way a slam against couples counseling in general. Oh, and by the way, I just want to have the disclaimer that this is not to be construed as mental health advice. We are talking about our own experiences and our own opinions. So I just want that to be clear. Yes. So when people go to couples counseling and you're with a non-disordered partner, I'm a huge advocate of counseling. I think counseling can be really, really great and a really good opportunity for people when they may be going through a rough spot in their relationship to go to couples counseling. So, but the problem becomes if you are with somebody who's disordered or, has narcissistic traits, couples counseling is not going to be a good, healthy, supportive place for you. Right. And I want to, we're going to do a top 5 again, and we're going to do the top 5 reasons why couples counseling doesn't work with a narcissistic partner. And I want to attribute our source to Psych Central. So the top 5 reasons why couples counseling doesn't work. Many couples therapists will attempt to address the victim's behavioral responses to the abuse rather than the abuse itself. Number 2, manipulative abusers will often put on a charming facade for the therapist, fooling them into thinking that they are the true victims. Narcissists will use therapy as a site for further gaslighting their victims if they even attend at all. Number 3, therapists who aren't aware of the manipulative tactics narcissists use or the complex dynamics of trauma bonding risk re-traumatizing survivors, and we're going to talk about that in depth. Number 4, there is a power imbalance in the relationship, so as long as the abuser controls the victim outside of the therapy room, there is a threat of harm and retaliation for anything brought up in therapy sessions. And number 5, the further someone is on the narcissistic spectrum, the less likely they are to change. Yeah. And I know, Lynn, you're going to be talking about that in some depth later on. So why doesn't couples counseling work? We're gonna spend some time talking about each one of those top 5 reasons in some depth. But the first thing that people need to understand if you are contemplating going to couples counseling with your narcissistic partner is that they are not going into this situation with the same belief system that you are, okay? This is not about trying to find a middle ground or trying to understand your feelings or your perceptions about things. Anything that you do with a narcissist in this context, it's going to be still about power and control. So counseling is not a space for a person whose primary goal is power and control over their victim, right? So let's focus on number 1 for a minute. So couples therapists will attempt to address the victim's behavioral responses to the abuse rather than the abuse itself. And that's problematic from go, right? So when you go into couples counseling, generally a couples counselor they're not looking to assign blame, right? The whole sort of point of couples counseling is to help couples to resolve their issues, and generally there's blame all around when you're talking about an intimate relationship. And by blame, I mean that people have responsibility in the context of their actions and behaviors in relationships. But when you're dealing with somebody who is abusive and somebody who is a victim of abuse, that throws those dynamics on its head, right?
Yes. But yes. Go finish.
Yeah.
Finish,
So what I'm, when you go and you meet with a counselor and they're approaching working with a couple from that perspective, they're going to be kind of going to be doing this whole thing where unintentionally or not, because they don't understand the dynamics of narcissistic abuse, okay? And unfortunately, a victim can end up being re-traumatized by the counselor inadvertently, a counselor who doesn't have experience in personality disorders and cluster B disorders and doesn't understand these kind of dynamics, because they're focusing on why you are responding the way that you are, as opposed to the fact that this person's actions and behavior is actually abuse. It takes a person, a counselor who really understands cluster B disorders, who really understands what narcissistic personality is, number 1, and number 2, that they can identify it when they walk through the door. And that's the biggest challenge, because number 2, manipulative abusers will often put on a charming facade for the therapist, which fools them into thinking that they are the true victims. And that's where we get, the whole Darvo thing, right? Where, a narcissist is very, very skilled at convincing people that, reversing the victim and offender, right? So they're very, very skilled at convincing people, professionals even, that, you, the survivor, is actually the abuser and they are the victim. And so that's a very, very dangerous thing that can happen in the context of couples therapy, where the therapist doesn't understand these dynamics, isn't skilled in working with narcissistic abusers, and is falling for the narcissist's seduction, the narcissist's tricks, the gaslighting, the blame shifting, and all of that. And it's happening in real time in a therapist's office. And again, the victim can end up feeling unheard, very unsupported, and re-victimized in the context of that whole experience. It's another, so it's not an aside, but it's also why I don't recommend mediation when you're going through a divorce, because of those same kinds of dynamics. And also I have found that custodial evaluators who come in to assess people in the context of these very complex contested custody situations, if they don't understand the dynamics that happen in these relationships, and they're being seduced or fooled by the narcissist when they're doing these assessments, the same kinds of things can happen. It can come out very, very skewed. And mediation, for the same reasons that couples counseling is not a great idea, because the power and control imbalance and skilled mediators will not take couples where there is abuse, emotional and psychological abuse. It doesn't have to be physical domestic violence.
So, Hope, I have to just stop you for 1 second.
Yeah.
Because I know you have this great list and I do want to dig into it. But I really want to talk about what victims of narcissistic abuse are looking for in counseling. Because I'm going to tell you that as a victim, I did not have a romantic relationship, as any of our viewers know. It was my father. But it's funny because there was a point in our relationship where I did want to go to like a family counseling type of thing. And it never happened, which I'll cover later why that never happened. But it's interesting because as a victim, I think that what you're going through, it's like these tiny little droplets of abuse that if someone on the outside were to see, they would only see one little teeny tiny thing and they might not think anything of it. But for you, it's a continual drip drop of constant, insidious abuse. Now, why do I say that? Because as a victim, we're looking for someone to say, here's what it is. You're right. You're right. This person is doing these horrible, cruel things to you.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, though, Lynn, because it really depends where you are in your own journey.
In the cycle of abuse?
Well, in your own journey, not even the cycle of abuse, but in terms of you recognizing, who this person really is. Because when people go to couples counseling, usually they're at the point in their relationship where they're still invested.
Hope.
And they're still
holding
on to hope. Or smoking the hopium, as Chump Lady says, right? So when you are in that point in the relationship, you still believe that it can be saved. So it's not necessarily that you want the counselor to see, that this person is treating you so horribly, because you might still be in this part of your own journey where you're blaming yourself for everything, right? So maybe you want the counselor to help you to figure out how to be a better partner because you've been, brainwashed by the narcissist into believing that this is all your fault. But usually what happens is that, and I can tell you, what happened with me. I mean, I can give you my own personal experience.
Please.
It's probably different for other people, but for me, at the point where I decided couples counseling was, where we had to go, it was it probably, I don't remember specifically because there were so many silent treatments, but I think it was after one of the, really severe silent treatments. And of course, the cycle and the silent treatment is like a mini discard, right? Comes back, apologizes, says sorry, all this kind of stuff. And so, I'm thinking, this can't continue because this is so destructive, right, to the relationship.
Right.
But, we need help. What I was thinking is we need help, right? We need help, and we need a counselor who can help us learn how to communicate better, which is the thing that is sold, right?
Right.
That's the thing that's sold, to basically, and we are good codependents. We're great enablers. We want to take responsibility. We want to do all the work, right?
Except one of my 10 red flags of a narcissist, they don't communicate well or sometimes at all.
Well, right. but the thing is like, okay, I'm calling the couples counselor because I'm still invested in the relationship. I want this counselor to help us communicate better.
Sure.
So one of the things that, and that kind of is number 3, therapists who aren't aware of the manipulative narcissist tactics or the complex dynamics of trauma bonding risk re-traumatizing survivors, right? So, I go in and I present as being, so in love with my partner, and when in reality I'm trauma bonded, okay, and was trauma bonded at that time. Yeah. But that's how I present.
Wow.
Okay. One of the things that I think happens in therapy if you go to counseling with a narcissist, narcissists, first of all, they're never going to go on their own. Okay. They just don't wake up one day and say, hey, I need counseling. All right. It's either they're being forced into it by a partner, and jumping through those hoops so that they can keep the partner trapped in the cycle.
Right.
Sometimes they're court ordered into counseling, not couples counseling, but, individual counseling for some reason.
Sure.
And, may or may not follow that court order, because often, court orders don't apply to them. But, it's you're never going to find a narcissist who wakes up one day and says, I really need to understand myself better and understand why I'm having all of these difficulties in my life. I think I'm going to go to counseling. No, that's simply not going to happen.
Is that because they don't possess any self-awareness?
That is why.
Yes.
That is exactly why. So, they're generally being dragged by the victim into the couple's counseling office. And, this is what happened in my situation. And I've talked with other survivors of narcissistic abuse, and I find that this is a pretty common occurrence, is they will show up in the early days of counseling when they are in the number two, part of this dynamic where they're, still able to fool the therapist with their charming facade and the poor me act and the whole thing. And because counselors, they don't realize what they're dealing with.
Right.
They're doing this whole thing where they're trying to balance the needs of both parties, right? But at some point, when you're in counseling, you're going to be confronted by your counselor, whether it's individual counseling or couples counseling.
Right.
A good counselor is going to, push back a little bit and try, and that's supposed to help you to learn, to gain self-awareness and try to, improve, some of the reasons why you came into counseling. It's difficult to be confronted by a counselor. I mean, anyone, who's been in counseling can acknowledge that. But most of us are going to take that advice, probably go home, think about it, and then come back to the next session and be like, I've thought about what you said and I want to learn how to, but a narcissist is going to suffer a narcissistic injury when that happens, because they are perfect. They're not the ones that are the problem in the relationship. They may walk in pretending like they want to work this out, but their agenda in their mind has nothing to do with working it out. It has to do with, say it with me, people, maintaining power and control in the relationship. That's all it is. That's all it ever is. They're trying to enlist the counselor to be a flying monkey, take their side. And if a counselor confronts them, which is what happened in my situation, my counselor was great. Okay? She was fantastic.
Wow.
I have to say, she recognized fairly early on what was going on. And when she's a very gentle person. This is not a person who's like, in his face, but even her gentle confrontations, right? Chased him right out the door. So I think that our couples counseling lasted 3 sessions. And from what I have heard, that's fairly typical.
Wow.
From other people as well, that the second that they're confronted and, they're not getting that adulation and undying support from the counselor, narcissists, just like borderline personalities, you're all good or you're all bad. The counselor went from being his champion to being somebody who he couldn't trust. And he stormed out of the counseling session, never to return.
Oh.
Yes.
Wow. Very typical.
Yes. Very, very typical. Wow. And I think that, that ending is probably a typical ending if you do attempt couples counseling with a narcissist.
It's so funny. I had no counseling, know that.
Yeah.
But anytime I confronted my father about anything, okay? When you said this, you hurt me, when you did this, whatever it was, he did what I like to call like a narc spin, because there was always, we're turning the tables, he's making himself the victim. I don't understand what he's going through. And then we start with the word salad and throwing all kinds of things in. And at the end of the day, it was all my fault, and I'm crazy for thinking anything else.
But that's exactly what's going to happen in the context of a counseling session as well.
Wow.
So a smart, astute counselor who understands cluster B.
Yeah.
That's why whenever I, and at the Center for Hope, we have counselors who are trained in this and who understand cluster B dynamics. So, and by the way, they can do virtual counseling. So if you're interested in talking to somebody, we don't do couples counseling, but if you're interested in talking to a counselor about what's going on in your life, you can contact the Center for Hope. They do virtual sessions as well. But, for a couples counselor who doesn't have this kind of training, you can easily fall into the weeds and the kinds of things that I'm talking about right now.
Yep.
But so that's why it's super, super important that, you find a counselor who does understand these dynamics.
So I want to ask you, Hope, you handle and counsel people and advocate for your clients through divorce.
Yes.
And also other areas of family law, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So what happens if one of your clients comes to you and says, I think things are going well because I want to go to counseling, couples counseling, and she's on board?
Yeah. So that generally wouldn't happen. I wouldn't be talking about mental health stuff with my clients, but I do get the question about mediation all the time.
Okay.
And mediation is a similar kind of a situation where a neutral person is there to help the parties resolve their divorce in a setting that is less conflictual. And again, just like counseling, I think mediation is a fabulous thing for people who are going into it with the right mindset, who are going into it to reach a middle, who are trying to resolve their differences in an adult way, who are willing to put the best interests of their children first. Mediation can be a great option. But the reason why mediation doesn't work with narcissists is the exact same reason that couples counseling doesn't work.
Right.
Is because their agenda is power and control. So that, they go into a mediation with the same agenda. They're not there to reach the middle. They're there to intimidate and to control and to try to get the mediator on their side and play the victim and do all of their, theatrics. And so, mediation, again, I don't recommend to people who are dealing with somebody with a narcissistic, on the narcissistic spectrum and or, disordered in that way, because you're not going to reach the middle. They don't have the same agenda as you. Their agenda is nefarious. And that's the thing that you have to remember. It's not the mediator or the counselor's fault.
Right.
It's that they don't understand who is walking into their office.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Right. So that's the power imbalance in the relationship, and a mediator and a counselor who doesn't pick up on those. Those aspects. It could cause more harm than good.
Sure.
So number 5. That we've been touching on all this whole time is that narcissists do not benefit from counseling, regardless of whether it's couples counseling or individual counseling. And it's the bottom line reason for that is because they have no empathy. Consequences don't apply to them, and they have no interest in changing because the problems are always somebody else's fault. But Lynn, I know that you have a top 5 list for the reasons why narcissists don't do well in counseling.
Well, I think in general, there are so many times that we as the victim would love for our narcissist to go to some kind of therapy. And, experts say that therapy could be very successful for someone who has narcissistic personality disorder. I think it's kind of weird for experts to say that when people that suffer from narcissistic personality disorder are the least likely of any personality disorder. I might even go so far as to say any mental disorder to ever, as you said, wake up one day and say, I think I'm going to go to therapy.
Well, that requires self-awareness, which they don't have.
They don't have it.
So I say this all the time is, they're not going to change. They're not going to change.
Right.
And the only person that you can control is you.
Right.
But go ahead and let's hear the top 5 reasons why narcissists don't benefit from counseling.
All right. So the top 5 reasons why narcissists will refuse therapy. Number 1, they're perfect. You're the problem. Also, in that, in order to show any kind of progress,
you need to show some kind of vulnerability. You have to reveal the things that you do wrong. I have a whole list of my own that I do wrong, but narcissists are never going to show that kind of vulnerability. They just refuse. So there's no progress.
Right.
Number 2, narcissists are the best Academy Award winning actors and actresses that I have ever seen. And I feel like I've seen quite a few, and I know you have as well, Hope, but they will become whomever they need to portray in the situation, whatever the situation calls for.
Right.
You know, there's a line in Pretty Woman where Richard Gere asks Julia Roberts, what's her name? And she says, what do you want it to be?
Yeah.
And I feel like that is just a great encapsulation of a narcissist.
It's narcissistic mirroring is what it is. They look at you, they size you up. They're very, very good at this. And they do it with professionals. They do it with counselors and lawyers and judges and all the people involved. They look and they see, okay, you know, who does this person want me to be?
Absolutely. Number 3 on my top 5 is they flat out will never take responsibility for their actions. So, you know, if you call them out, if you confront them on anything, they are going to go into that narc spin and they are going to say it was that person's fault. It was that thing's fault. It was because of that.
Yeah.
I didn't do it.
Master blame shifters.
And if they apologize, it's going to be something like, I'm sorry for even going there.
Yeah.
Not, I'm sorry for hurting you.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
be aware, listen carefully. Number 4, you know, narcissists are often defined by their sense of entitlement and their desire to associate with other people of high status. Like they feel like not only are they entitled, but they're always VIPs. And therapists are just not VIPs to them. So they're not going to lower themselves to associate with them either. And then number 5, it's just, I believe that the biggest fear of a narcissist or their greatest concern is of exposure. And so the last thing they want you to do is share their bad behavior and their tactics and their punishment of you with someone else.
Right. And I think that's the reason why they walk out. You know, they tend to not stick around for as soon as they feel that they're being criticized, attacked in any way. And you know, that's it. That's the exposure piece, right?
Well,
nope.
I think it's funny that you say that because what comes to my mind is the one moment my narcissist did a major, very dramatic walkout of a family dinner at a restaurant. This did not have to do with couples counseling, but it totally has to do with the walkout. So I want to just share this with you. So basically, it's a very long story, so I'm going to just encapsulate. We had a family dinner with my father. It was my 2 young daughters and my husband and I. So it was 5 of us at a restaurant. And we were there. And it became very clear to my father that he had done something really horrible because I got really quiet. And my face probably, I'm not a poker player, so like I wear everything right here. So what he had said and done was so awful that I probably lost all color in my face. And my daughters are just watching with big eyes, okay? And so all of a sudden he puts 2 and 2 together and he goes, I'll take my dinner to go. And he stands up and he walks out real loud, says some other horrible things, and they got to witness that whole thing. Oh, and by the way, then of course I got the silent treatment after that.
Yeah.
So that's a whole nother topic for another day.
Yeah.
But yes, dramatic walkouts.
Yes, dramatic walkouts.
They love those.
Yes, that's the drama.
Yes.
So I hope that this information was helpful for anybody who is in that part of their journey where they are considering going to couples counseling.
Yes.
Because, you know, I don't want you to spend more time in the vortex, you know, down the rabbit hole with this person. If you can skip over this part,
please.
I'd like to give you, you know, I think what we're trying to do is give you the tools, the information to be able to say and feel that you don't have to give them this opportunity, because they're not going to make anything of it. They're going to disappoint you. It's a longer period of time that you're going to be stuck in this relationship, when you really should be evaluating how to take care of yourself, how to take care of your children, and how to get out. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time on the Narcissist Slayers.